Well, let me ask one more question. Just I think a good final question. Number one, let me back up a little bit and just say that there have been significant cracks that are beginning to form in the British, Saudi, Anglo-Dutch Empire concerning both the role of the Saudis in the events of the attacks leading up to 9/11, as well as their continued role in financing terrorism today. As you know, the continuing campaign to declassify the 28 pages is gaining significant traction among leading members of Congress. We also saw this week a press release from an organization of families of the victims of 9/11 called 9/11 Families United to Bankrupt Terrorism, demanding that the FBI come clean on what it knew concerning the connections between Saudi Arabia and the 9/11 hijackers. And they quote former Senator Bob Graham saying, "I am troubled by what appears to me to be a persistent effort by the FBI to conceal from the American people information concerning possible Saudi support of the September 11th attacks." And this initiative comes right on the heels of a bill that was filed last week by New York Congressman Peter King and New York Senator Chuck Schumer called the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA, which would close the foreign sovereign immunity loophole, which has been used up to this point to block various lawsuits that families have made against the Saudis concerning their role in financing the 9/11 attacks. Now, finally, during a hearing yesterday morning of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, in the wake of the al-Shabaab attacks in Nairobi, Kenya, Congressman Mike McCall of Texas, who's also the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, stated that the time has come to address the inconvenient truth that the majority of terrorism worldwide is funded by Saudi Arabia. He said, quote, "When you look at these organizations and you look at the funding streams, the majority of them are tied back to the Saudi peninsula in terms of funding. This is the inconvenient truth no one talks about, and no one wants to deal with it either. This is something we're going to have to deal with at some point in time. And I know it's something, with the Saudis being our ally, that presents a problem. It's a challenge, but I think it is something that we need to address and see it for what it really is." So, Lynn, since you, for one, have been quite outspoken since the very days that the September 11th attacks occurred about the role of the Saudis in financing these attacks, I figured it would be appropriate to give you an opportunity to comment on these matters.
The history of 9/11 starts from Britain. And Britain upgraded Saudi Arabia. We could have this large amount of money coming from oil revenues, and used the Saudis, who are also bullies because of this reason. And therefore they hammered the whole Middle East area and across northern Africa and so forth. You want to say what the problems of Africa are? Well, one of the biggest problems are Saudis, the Saudi influence, because they move in, and this has been a rival to the Chinese. China is the only nation which seriously does anything for help to people in Africa. Not in every part of Africa, but they have an extensive record on that thing. So the problem is that the Saudi operation is a British Empire operation. What happened was that when Franklin Roosevelt died, what took over was Truman. And Truman was simply a stooge for the British. So you have this British-Saudi connection, and then you have this arms function, which works between them. The entire Saudi operation against 9/11 in the United States is entirely British, because the British Empire, the British Kingdom Empire, is its real source. It was they, using Saudi oil, which they controlled, and producing weapons through the BAE operation, that created the instruments which hit New York City in 9/11. This is the authorship. Then you have Bush family. How do you think the Saudis who were in the United States, Saudi families, who were in the United States at that time, and they were all over the place, especially Texas, and especially as guests of the Bush family. And what happened is a special arrangement. Now you have young Bush is now the President of the United States. He's a fool, but he's the President of the United States. And he has caretakers who instruct him to all pull his nose. So this is the operation. What is the issue? The issue is the British Empire. Now, it's not a British Empire. It's British in the sense of nominally. It's also Saudi. It's also Dutch. The genesis of this empire system is Dutch. And it came because the Dutch, in their war against the Spaniards, you may recall that, the Dutch became the winners. The Dutch became the pestilence against France and other things, and then they moved across from the 17th century. They moved across and invaded. They were the first ones who suppressed the American colonization in Massachusetts, 1660. And they have always been the curse we had to fight against. This is our enemy. But the British Empire is our enemy, but it's really the Dutch Empire. And the Saudis are nothing but an offshoot of this whole thing. And therefore, because of the power that this combination represents in the world, the fact that they ran the drug operation against China, that they did a similar operation against India, what they do against all these countries of that region, is a reign of terror. And only if the United States, because it's in our character to deal with things like this, if only if the United States intervenes and says, this ends. This ends. And if the United States does honor by its own victims, the victims of New York City, for example, only if we act to correct this error will we find ourselves equipped with the stamina and insight necessary to deal with the British Empire problem.